Cyberpunk! The crisis of our time, the benchmarker's dream, the game that sold 1 million RTXs. Probably. Don't quote me on that. Somehow, despite still being present in plenty of graphics card review videos to this day, CDPR's dystopian sci-fi shooter is turning 5 years old. As this is and has been one of my favourite games, even in the early days when it was something of a pariah, I wanted to mark the occasion in some way. So I decided this was the perfect excuse to put together a classic 2020 high-end gaming rig. Cyberpunk 2077 has had a few different system requirements posted over the years, from the rather hopeful original spec sheet, which said you'd be able to get away with a quad-core i5 and a GTX 780, to the more recent Phantom Liberty expansion, whose recommended specs include an RTX 4080 and 12th Gen i9 to run the path-traced RT Overdrive mode. Even with some of the older hardware having been made obsolete by game updates and the loss of driver support since 2020, I like to think that some of that original spec sheet is still valid. I chose the original recommended spec for running at 4K RT Ultra, which includes a Ryzen 5 3600 and RTX 3080. However, I do have to come clean. My 3080 is the 12GB model, which is slightly higher performing and wasn't actually available in 2020. Of course, neither was the vanilla 3080, which was one of the first victims of the scalper pandemic and was essentially never readily available to buy at retail in its entire run. I've paired the 6-core 12-thread Ryzen 3600 with a period-appropriate B550 motherboard and a King's Ransom in DDR4 3600 and bolted it down under the very same Kraken X62 I was using in my personal rig back in 2020. The case and power supply are the Fantex Evolve TG and EVGA GQ 750W gold unit, and they too are leftovers of the PC I first played Cyberpunk on, though at the time it was home to a Ryzen 7 2700X and a far more humble RTX 3060 Ti. First, an introduction to my benchmark run. Yes, Cyberpunk has one built in for maximum consistency, but it doesn't seem to give the most realistic picture of how the game will play, and it also didn't exist when the game launched in 2020. My custom test run has been modified a bit since I first ran it in early 2021. As usual, it starts outside of V's home in Mega Building 10. However, since an update a couple of years ago, this stage of the game now has us being attacked by gangs of corpo thugs. Which is exciting and all, but also makes benchmarking less chill than I'd like. I summon the Mercmobile, formerly the property of Night City's equivalent of Batman, because it's about the fastest car I own, and it's usually pretty easy to lose the corpos after a few seconds without engaging them. I run through this short street, hang a right and follow the road around the riverfront as far as the second bridge. Taking a left at the intersection, it's at this point that frame rates rapidly climb as we cross over the river, presumably because there's far less peripheral stuff to render. Bombing across the next intersection towards the site of the old Arasaka building, and suddenly the CPU starts kicking into overdrive. Evidently there's a lot of NPC traffic around here, and frame rates take a tumble. After this covered area, there's a yard on the left where I used to finish my run back in the day. I'd leap out of the car and mow down a bunch of security guards with sociopathic glee, but I've put those days behind me. I decided I didn't want to be the kind of benchmarker who treats lives so cheaply, who only sees these games as a source of violent expression. Plus, I got there one time and found all the guards were already dead and weren't going to respawn. Oh well, it seems like enough time has passed that they've decided to respawn now. You alright chaps? Long time no see. Instead of stopping for a bit of the old ultra-violence, I carry on to the next intersection, turn left and reach the massive roundabout at the city centre. I stop at the first overpass, jump out of the car and walk the final stretch. Here, the CPU is really being taxed. There are dozens of NPCs to process, and as we cross the bridge, there's a bunch of multi-lane highways running beneath us, so everything is working extremely hard. The test run finishes on one of these Billie Jean illuminated floor tiles, and at 4K with the RT Ultra preset, we see an average of 11.5 FPS with 1% lows of 8.2. Yikes. You see, dear viewer, I've been lying to you. The capture footage is not at the RT Ultra preset. It was at native 4K, don't get me wrong. However, it was just the regular Commodore Garden Ultra setting. RT was not happening at full resolution, whatever the system requirements might have said. In fact, ray tracing meant that DLSS was absolutely mandatory. My second RT test run was with quality DLSS, bringing the render resolution down to 1440p, and the average FPS shot up to a respectable 34, while 1% lows were more like 25. This is using the convolutional model of upscaling, which was the only one available at the time. Since then, Nvidia have released the new transformer model that subtly improves image quality at a small performance cost, and although it's not strictly period accurate, I did a run with it enabled to see what the impact was. At these settings, it was negligible, perhaps 5% lower on average. Still, a 33 to 34 FPS experience is not what I'd call recommended, so I gave it a slightly heavier hand. DLSS performance drops the render resolution to 1080p and gives a few more image artifacts to boot. It does, however, bring that average up to 48 FPS and keeps the lows above the 30 mark, and it certainly makes driving a hell of a lot easier. Transformer mode has about a 6% performance impact, taking about 3 FPS off the top. That's pretty much the story I wanted to tell, but I felt like there was something more to be said. Around the time the 12GB 3080 was released, CDPR were working on implementing the RT Overdrive mode. Originally advertised as an experimental feature, this represented full, real-time path tracing, replacing all rasterized rendering in-game. Before now, we hadn't seen anything like this except in Quake 2. The quality difference is actually pretty stark if you compare them side by side, but so is the performance impact. The recommended specs from the Phantom Liberty expansion, which is when Overdrive stopped being listed as experimental, specify an RTX 4080, which according to Tech PowerUp has about 45% more performance than even this 12GB 3080. With it now falling below the recommended spec, the 3080 would need me to drop resolution even further to get a good Overdrive experience. At the same DLSS performance setting as before, both CN and TM runs fall below 30 FPS on average, and go into the low 20s at times. DLSS Ultra Performance is upscaling to 4K from just 720p, and the ghosting and other glitches become extremely apparent. However, the upshot is I'm now getting similar performance as in the regular RT Ultra mode at DLSS Performance. Suspiciously similar, in fact. And it turns out there's a reason for that. Despite the relatively low frame rates, both RT Ultra and RT Overdrive tests were being held back by the Ryzen 5. Not by much, the GPU was running between 75 and 90% most of the time, but it was having an impact. I went back and retested both settings with the crowd density dropped from high to low to see if that helped, and it kinda did. The RT Ultra run gained about 10%, which wasn't enough to get close to 60, but it was a start. Meanwhile, the path tracing test actually lost a couple of frames. I don't think I ever really believed that the 3600 would be good enough for this test, and this pretty much invalidates it. Without ray tracing, the Ryzen 5's good for about 80 FPS, but RT modes are just too much for it. If you'd built this PC for Cyberpunk in 2020, presumably upgrading in 2022 when this particular version of the RTX 3080 came out, it would have been about the best gaming rig you could have bought at the time. Well, barring perhaps the CPU, but imagining you'd spent your entire 5-year budget on this setup, enriching a bunch of scalpers in the process, you'd hope that it would still have some relevance in 2025 and beyond. Does it? Open world? Check. Big crime-ridden city? Check. Disappointing technical performance at launch? Check. Actually, Spider-Man 2 is still awaiting its Cyberpunk moment, as at the time of writing it's still considered a very bad port, and if you want a flat frame time graph in this one, you'll need to cap your FPS. At 4K very high with DLSS performance, things look promising at first, but as soon as you start swinging along, performance drops off a cliff. The CPU is holding things back. Scratch that. A better CPU would give a better experience, but it's the game's fault. Things really shouldn't be this bad. Turning on RT magnifies the issue, and with the high RT preset, performance is down into the mid-40s. The Last of Us Part 2 is known as a pretty heavy game, but the Cyberpunk PC actually seems to have it in check. The Ryzen is being stressed even at lower frame rates, but I don't think this is unreasonable performance for a linear single-player game. At native 4K very high, with DLAA that's less of a catastrophe on performance than it is in Cyberpunk, we're seeing performance in the low 40s. DLSS quality, using the transformer model because why not, the average is now almost 60 FPS. I'm quite impressed. Cyberpunk might be the modern-day Crysis, but CryEngine is being used in the fundamentally unmodern setting of Kingdom Come 2. Again, this PC is capable of handling native 4K at acceptable frame rates, even at the ultra quality preset, and 60 FPS is just about possible with a small amount of DLSS. Indiana Jones is one of a couple of games in recent years that is pushing you to upgrade to a graphics card with more VRAM. 12GB seems to be enough for 4K high settings, but trying to go any higher or enable path tracing is going to result in a black screen and a prompt to load into safe mode. Which is a shame, but it still works well as it is, averaging just over 50 FPS at native resolution or almost 75 FPS with quality DLSS. Granted, these are very unserious settings, but there are some benefits to playing CS2 at 4K max settings. Okay, they probably don't outnumber the benefits of playing at a screaming high FPS, and you can do that too, but then the Ryzen will be the limiting factor. At these settings, the GPU is still capable of 140 plus, and the CPU is keeping up, for the most part. Cyberpunk has often been compared unflatteringly to GTA 5, and that game received its latest graphical upgrade this year. My benchmark run this time starts outside protagonist M's home in McMansion 10. At this point in the story, our character is being relentlessly attacked by his wife via phone call, which creates a timer in the bottom corner that makes benchmarking less chill than I'd like. Bombing carefree along the game's approximation of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, overreacting to a curb, and climbing the foothills of Jack's Hill to deal with a pest problem, I complete the benchmark run at native 4K max settings with an average of 44 FPS. Funnily enough, even with the upgrades, GTA 5 is still less demanding than Cyberpunk, and adding quality DLSS is all that's needed for a 60 FPS average. Though I'd probably do some more tweaking, cause it falls below 50 quite often. And I'm gonna end it there. The Ryzen 5 3600 makes this a pretty unbalanced system, so I'm not sure I'd want to push my luck with anything truly hardcore. Maybe I'll do a revised version with the 3700X and the 3080 Ti and see how your dream stimulus check gaming rig is doing 5 years later. It's weird thinking of Cyberpunk as an old game. I mean, it undoubtedly is. We are in the third hardware generation since its launch. The original console version was for PS4 and Xbox One, and Night City still felt like a fictional place back then. I think it's largely because there haven't been any games released since then that really scratch the same itch. You can go back to GTA 5 or GTA 4, but nothing since has been an open world game of this kind of scale that's acted as this kind of graphical benchmark. Likewise, it's strange to think of the hardware of its original system requirements as being old, Part of that is just how hard it was to get hold of at the time, and another part might be to do with just how little the more consumer-level cards of the subsequent generations seem to have improved since 2020. Perhaps by the time of the next game in the Cyberpunk universe, the deck will feel a little less stacked against the average Toomba, but I won't be holding my breath. Sorry the content's been a bit thin on the ground lately. I had a sponsored video fall through, and I've been spending far too long working on video essays. Normal service should now be resumed. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.